start from the top, just kind of about your career first, how you got started, before we go on to Taken, how you got started, what your journey has been so far.
Um, it's backwards. My parents were
Okay.
both writers. My dad was a writer and a producer. My mom was a writer, and they hated the movie business and were long out of it. And I had dropped out of school to play in a rock band. So nepotism did absolutely nothing for me, except that my idea of what grown-ups did when they went to work was they went in the other room and typed. So,
Right.
there's that. And there's a guy named Stuart Kornfeld who was the drummer in my band. So I knew him in high school, and then he was the drummer in my band in college. And when we all dropped out, he refused to drop out. So he wound up in Hollywood. And I ran into him at a movie theater. I was probably in my mid-20s. And he had started producing, and he produced for Mel Brooks, he produced The Elephant Man and The Fly and a bunch of other stuff. And I was playing in a band called Sparks, and Stuart and I had decided to write. We'd written a script and it wasn't very good. And then I was playing in this band, and the band was sort of popular in LA. And Stuart called me and said that Atlantic Records and the Ladd Company had an idea for a movie about rock and roll. And he had told them that I played in a band and I spoke in complete sentences. And so they flew me back from Paris, where my band was playing. And I told them that their idea sucked, and they hired me on the spot.
Amazing.
This is something I've never been able to recreate that moment again, of being that obnoxious and arrogant and getting the job. And so for a while I did both, and I got a lot of jobs writing about rock and roll, and nobody makes those movies. The junior executives would pay me to write them because I was cheap, and they had seen my band, and then their bosses would go, well, there's no part for Kevin Costner in this. And it being the 1980s. And so then the only other jobs that rock and roll guys could get were horror movies, because they sort of conflated the two. And and I like horror movies. So I wound up writing Nightmare on Elm Street 5, and a movie that was meant to be House 3, but wound up being called The Horror Show. And then I sort of looked up, and I wasn't in the band anymore, and I was writing full time. And here I am.
Wow. Your part about where you said that you hated the script and they hired you on the spot. It reminded me of that episode of Seinfeld where George Costanza. I don't know if you're a Seinfeld fan.
Yeah, yes, and I remember seeing that when it came out. But exactly.
And he got the job with the Yankees. So that's great. And where are you originally from? Which part of the world?
I went to Hollywood High. I'm from LA. I grew up in North Hollywood and then in Hollywood.
Okay, so you've been in California,
Yeah,
more or less, from the beginning.
Yeah.
Okay. And how did you get involved in Taken and
is a sort of a combination of things. I had my movie Dante's Peak had just come out, and I had a general meeting at, I guess it was Amblin then, not DreamWorks, and
right.
It just sort of the conversation led to that Stephen had 20 hours on the Sci-Fi Channel to do Alien Abduction, and was I interested? and I guess he had seen Dante's Peak, and he had seen a movie I wrote called $20, which was a script of my dad's that I rewrote, and thankfully he liked them both. And Dante's Peak is heavily stolen from Jaws. So
I've seen it.
In Jaws there's big shark, bigger shark, and I was like, well, we should do the same thing, big eruption, bigger eruption, and I'll make the mayor the love interest. So I confessed to having stolen Jaws, and I think that one thing led to.
Well, a lot of films borrow from Jaws, right? Like even Twister.
Sure. Well, yes, it's stealing from the best. and I did.
Exactly. And then I remember when Dante's Peak came out. Incidentally, I actually watched Dante's Peak again 3 months ago. And I remember Volcano came out around that time too with Tommy Lee Jones. There was this trend, Deep Impact and Armageddon,
Yeah.
Volcano, and I don't know how that
It-
happened, but it kept happening.
I have a theory which I can't substantiate, which is simply that development executives go to parties, and
And they
if you come back and tell your boss, I want to do a movie about a volcano, and your boss says that's a great idea, you're in business. If your boss says that's a terrible idea, and 3 weeks later someone else announces that they're doing a movie about a volcano, you still look good. So it's a win-win situation. I have no idea if this is true. I know that we stopped Michael Crichton from writing a book about a volcano erupting because he was just like, there's too many of these. I can't do it. And,
Really?
that's, because he would have clearly blown us all out of the water on the spot, right?
Yeah.
But he was like,
he kind of did. I mean, it wasn't like a volcano-based movie, but in Congo, there
Yeah.
was a scene about volcano and earthquakes. Like,
well, easily, for all I know, he used the
Yeah.
scenes he'd already written when he gave up the volcano movie. That's certainly what I would have done.
Probably, yeah, you're right. You're right. And how did you? I mean, it's one thing to have, to find out that Spielberg has 20 hours on sci-fi, come up with a series, but in order to write something about UFOs or alien abductions or whatever that is you're writing about, you have to either know it or you have to believe in it to a certain extent or be fascinated with it or to be curious about it.
Well, when I in our first meeting, I was like, well, really, all I know about this is your movies and the X-Files. I really don't know a lot. It was like, that's better because you won't come with a lot of preconceived notions.
Yeah.
And so, I obviously I read a lot. I have a huge collection of contactee books now, which are the guys from the 50s, that first wave of sightings. And I went to a lot of conventions. I went to Roswell. I kept looking for something that I could hang on to that would make, that would resonate for me. And it was when I got the title. I mean, because at first we were going to call it Closer because of Close Encounters. And then, and by the way, since the Liam Neeson movie has come out, I've had to spend the rest of my life going, no, not that one, the other one. But
that's the same problem with Google. When you Google Taken, that's the only thing that comes up.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, thank God it's called Steven Spielberg Presents Taken. But once I thought, well, it's called Taken, then I thought, I'm going to make this about every single way in which, this is going to sound a little pretentious, but every single way in which people are taken, drugs, love, lust, power. And so once I had that sort of framework, it really helped me to find, stories within that world that were about all these other things, because on some level, whether you literally believe in aliens in that sense, or you don't. I mean, what's fascinating about our consistent compulsion to tell that story, because we've been telling it since the Incubus and the Succubus. It's almost more interesting if it's not literally true. Because if it's literally true, then wow, that happened. But if it's not literally true, then why do we keep coming up with that story? I'm wandering into Joseph Campbell land here, but it's really, it just became, the deeper I got into it, the more riveting that part of it became to me.
And that's so accurate, right? Because even throughout the series, I actually had I watched it again last week, and just to kind of refresh my memory because it's been such a long time. And obviously with a new pair of eyes, in terms of age, teaches you so much more about perception, about people and all that. There was that constant question throughout, even when they were sitting, I think it was episode 6 or 7 or towards the end, or they were kind of sitting in a group session where they're talking about, nobody believes us. And that idea of nobody believes us was literally started from the very beginning, and it kept lingering. And I think that's for an audience that connects, because as an audience member, like even to this day, like, a lot of people, there's skeptics out there. There are people who believe in it thoroughly. There are people who don't even believe in it. So there's all that idea of curiosity, which was really built really well into the entire series. So I just wanted to sort of make a comment of that.
Well, thanks. I also, I realized like where the show was going. There was, I certainly couldn't answer the questions I was asking. They were, like, what is the meaning of existence kind of questions. So
yeah,
like the best I could do was really ask them well, or try to. So that sort of became another sort of, part of it.
Yeah. And I think it's important. I mean, I've learned this too myself, being a filmmaker, is that it's so important not to get the answers to the questions that you want as well, because if you keep asking questions, it will show in the film, it will show in the story, and that's the audience. Like, you are the audience, right? So if you're asking yourself that question, the audience will ask that question too, until the last frame.
Well, that becomes it's a hard thing about, this is a hard thing about what we do, is that in most other art forms, you're asking the question. That's why you're doing it.
Yeah,
because we have to have we're spending tons of money and other people's money, so a lot of times we have to answer all those questions before we start, and that's a very different process. I mean, I'm working on something now. You can't see this, but my entire wall is full of cards, meaning I've answered all these questions before I started writing, which sometimes is a lot less fun,
Yeah.
And part of what was so fun about Taken was that we were under insane guns. So like I was writing it as we were shooting it by the end. And
okay.
So that became part of the excitement, was like, I really didn't know what was going to happen, and I mean, I sort of did. But.
Yeah, no, I get it. And that's similar with when you make documentaries, depending on the type of documentary you make, like the ones that I've been involved in as a narrative documentary, and I'm filming everything in real time as it's happening, like following the protagonist. And I have no clue where the hell is the story going. And that is scary as hell. But at the same time, that's what keeps you going, at least for me personally.
Sure.
You don't know where it's going.
Well, I would imagine, don't you find, I mean, you must like the story shows up in the editing room a lot then for you, right?
Yeah, it is. I mean, you have an idea, you figured out the beginning, where the ending is, what the journey is of the protagonist. And then you have no clue if they're going to make it till the end or how they're going to make it till the end, right? So, but it's fascinating how stories are. And one of the things I really loved about my favorite character, and this is back in 2002, right? At that time, characters like that were really rarely written. I think maybe with the exception of a few, Colonel Owen, played by Joel Gretsch.
Oh, Joel Gretsch. He's so good. There's one of the most profound things I've ever seen an actor do, I think, is there's the scene where are spoilers okay?
That's fine.
Well, okay, so there's the scene where he kills his wife.
Yeah.
And then it's followed by the scene where he tells his children that their mother died. Right?
I know. That was insane.
And, like, first of all, I had written him running the car off the road, and the location fell through and we couldn't afford the stunt.
Right.
And so Sergio Mamenka, the director, was like, can he just walk up to the car and shoot her in the head? And I was like, yes. And that's 10,000 times better than any stupid low budget version of a car chase and run a car off a cliff would be. Yeah. But then Joel comes into that next scene with his kids. And I guess, where you see this a lot is in The Sopranos. The Sopranos is a totally sociopathic show.
Yeah.
It's written by sociopaths. You watch a scene where they do something horrible, and in the next scene, Tony's worried about his daughter going to college, and the scene's written and played as if he hadn't just murdered somebody.
Yeah.
And Joel did that. I'd never seen an actor do that before. He played the scene with his kids, brokenhearted, like, oh my God, your mother died. With nothing in his entire performance that suggested that he just killed her. And it was like, that is really, really messed up, like way more messed up than I had written it, and I was just like stunning. Yeah, Joel, I mean, the cast was great. It was, I mean, it's an insanely good bunch of people, but Joel was really, really, really good.
Yeah, and that scene that you described, what's so amazing about that scene, if somebody was just flipping channels and that scene was on, you wouldn't know the context.
I think you were in a soap opera.
Yeah, that's how great that scene was, that you would actually believe that you wouldn't have a clue this guy is being a conniving and manipulative individual.
No, totally. And that's on him. That's I mean, I'd love to take credit for that, but that's completely his performance. It's really, really good.
But yeah, his character was just so well written. I think that's one character that I felt personally, for me, I felt that was the strongest character in the series. And when he obviously died, I mean, as happy as I was at the same time.
That's right, because when we got to the later episodes, and I really liked Heather, who plays his granddaughter.
Yeah.
And Joel and I had become friends, and I was like, I'm gonna write you back, because there's visions in the show. So I'm gonna write you back in because I want you back one more time. So that whole scene where he comes back, and I guess it's an 8 something, that just because I liked him so much, I wanted him back in the show.
Yeah, no, he was phenomenal. And I think what really was really good also was Dakota Fanning's narration from the very beginning.
Well, it
probably happened after in post, I'm guessing.
Well, no, what happened was I had written a couple of drafts of the first episode, and I just couldn't get the tone that I wanted. And I had this sense that it was somehow the show was going to be kind of sad and bittersweet altogether. And I can literally remember the day I just came, I know where I was sitting in the office, and I was like, my mother always talked to me a lot about the sky. And I was like, oh, now I know what the show's about. And so the narration, I wrote the narration as we went along. I mean, a lot of it changed, obviously, but it was in there from before we started shooting. Mm-hmm. And I remember because my son is the same age as Dakota, and he was a wild 5 or 6 year old, whatever. And I would go to the sessions,
right?
And there's this little girl, and I was like, "Do you know what the word wistful means?" And she's like, "Oh yeah, absolutely." And then she reads the thing completely differently. It's like, it was just. I've seen her as an adult, and it's still sort of like a running joke between us. It's like, I'll see her somewhere, and she'll go wistfully, and it's like, yeah. She had that, but I've only had that happen to me a couple of times writing, where I just like one line sort of informed how the whole thing was going to feel, I
thought that was cool. I thought that was a really nice touch, and it also connected the dots between the story, and sometimes it gave you a little bit of a break from what was going on, just for the audience to kind of just take a pause and take a breather. In your research, Les, especially the Roswell incident, aside from what you wrote into the script and the show, what did you personally get out of it? Like, what did obviously you gained new knowledge, but what was your belief in that? This is like a little bit off topic from this series question,
I'll tell you something also that's sort of interesting about the way pop, because there's a way in which pop culture informs the UFO world. I mean, right. There used to be sightings of dirigibles when Jules Verne was writing. And then after Orson Welles, there was all the stuff that we think of as, the 50s stuff. And so it always goes back and forth. And what I think is that it was a spy balloon. I believe the Air Force, their confession from the 70s. The parts I find hard to believe about alien abduction are about the rigors of the myth are that these beings that are so evolved that they can move through time and space have come all the way here to stick things up our butts. I'm not buying that part. I think it's a little bit, what's the Sherlock Holmes thing about the easiest explanation and all of that. So the fact that 90% of the sightings are right by Air Force bases suggests to me that it's more likely that our government is testing stuff that we don't know about. I mean, the Area 51 stuff, they had a prototype of the stealth at the same time that people were seeing this weird thing in the sky. So I think that explains a lot of it. That said, sure, there's life on other planets and who the hell knows, but I don't particularly think it looks like things that were designed by an art department in the 1950s to make science fiction movies. That seems too coincidental. So I had read all the stuff on Roswell, and it's a fascinating place to go to because, you know, that airstrip is so enormous, and this was pre 9/11. So we rent airspace to other countries because there's this huge airfield there that's been abandoned. And so there's this little tiny town, and there are people from all over the world, the air forces of like 6 different countries, because they test planes out there. This is a really interesting, you know, and then there's a tourist trade that's developed around the alien part. So it's a fascinating place. But, you know, at the time we said it was a weather balloon. Then we admitted that it was a spy balloon. So one day I decided I would just make up this bit of, well, okay, so the spy balloon crashed. What did it bump into? Well, it bumped into a flying saucer, and that's why it crashed. You can find that online now as true. And as far as I know, that's just something I made up on a Thursday. So that sort of suggests to me that a lot of the other stuff came from similar places. Like a lot of stuff seems awfully similar to the Orson Welles radio broadcast, or, gee, now they want the same things they wanted in the day the earth stood still. You know, it's so the grain of salt that I take, I can't even say it's a grain of salt, because again, I go back to what's really, really interesting to me is, why would we want to keep telling this story if it isn't literally true? That seems much more interesting. You know, that goes to, you know, why we need gods and why we need all the things we need. You know, it's just fascinating.
Yeah. And what in your research, did you come across the Phoenix Lights back in the late 90s when that happened?
I think that had just happened when I was writing.
At the time, probably when you were in the writing.
I remind me, but I feel like yes, and I
was. I think it was 1997. But basically, what it was pretty much the entire city witnessed. 1997, March 13th. On the southern west states of Arizona and Nevada, people saw this V-shape, whatever you want to call it, with lights on, and it was apparently, according to a lot of people's testimony, it was huge, like the size of several football fields. Go on.
Well, I just, what about, you know, the last 2 years? I mean, it's been like
that was going to be my next question.
Yeah, no, I mean, that's like that, like, because, you know, my opinions are all based on the time when I spent in that world. And I'm like, as I read that, I'm like, on the other hand, I mean, because those stories, they're always, as you're about to totally doubt it, there's one like really reputable, you know, like Air Force commander who says, and you're like, and certainly, you know, like I have, like, there's people who've been, you know, up close that I mean, you know, I by the way, I would love to see a UFO. You know, I wish I'd seen one.
We are, won't we all? But what's amazing to me, I was in Nevada a few months ago, and I finally made a point. I've always wanted to go. Whenever I'm in Nevada, I'm like, I want to go to the Area 51 area. As far as you can go. So I went finally, and I didn't know that the entire Area 51 area, whether it's underground or wherever it is, stretches 88 miles. I mean, that's insane. So it must be. That's like almost equivalent to like a big city.
Yes.
You know?
Yeah.
So who knows what's going on under, and I wasn't even near the Area 51. There's a place called when you get out of Nevada, Vegas, it's called Alien Center Shop, like where they sell like souvenirs. And it's just like literally in the middle of the highway, there's an Alien Center Shop, there's a gas station, and that's it. So I was talking to the store owner, and she's like, if you go on the road for the next like an hour and a half, you're fine. But even in this area, if you go behind our store in the desert area, vehicles will come in.
I met a guy recently, is dating a friend of mine. He's stationed there, and I was like, so what can you tell me? And he was like, nothing. It's like, I like, come on, I won't tell anybody. It was like, I can't.
No, and then people fly in from helicopter every day to work.
Yeah.
There's actually an airport just way before that, where people fly out just to go to work and then come back. You can't even drive there.
Well, but like again, I mean, like we spent a lot of money on military stuff, and
No, I know.
I mean, it's like, I mean that. But do you familiar with the Aberdeen Proving Ground in Maryland? That's another wonderful spot.
No.
Maybe where Lyme disease came from.
Yeah, no, what?
Depending on your conspiracy bent.
No, growing up, I used to be fascinated by UFOs, and I used to believe that they exist. Like, that's what's coming up. But as you grow older and you start, what you're sort of mentioning too, I now do believe that it's either somebody did visit us long time ago, and we have used that to make these sophisticated, flying discs or objects and whatnot. Or they're just military based tests, and everything else is a distraction to keep our minds off. You know what I mean?
Well, that clearly, in the midst of the Cold War, the propaganda people were like, whether it was true or not, they were like, yeah, we're going to use this because, it's a better story than, any of the spy stuff. Have you read any of the Jacques Vallée books? The guy that Truffaut character is based on in Close Encounters? He's
long time ago.
Because he traces the myth. I mean, there's one. It's a Taken story, if you'll indulge me. So, if you remember, there's a scene where they go onto the ship, and the guy sees his mom, and his mom brings out a plate of cookies.
Yeah, I think in the last few episodes. Yeah.
Yeah, and it had been beef stew until the last minute, and then I was like, I'm going to make it cookies. It sounds more homey, so I made it cookies. Mm. I'm reading the Jacques Vallée book, and it's about the history of abductions from the 12th century on. And there's an Irish incubus and succubus myth. And a woman goes into the woods, and there's a house floating in the woods, and she comes back pregnant, and she's also carrying a plate of scones. And he goes on and on about the obsession with baked goods, to the point where there was a guy who claimed to be abducted in the 1950s, and the Air Force tested the cookies that he brought back to see if they were made of something other than flour and eggs and butter. They were not. They were made of flour and eggs and butter. But why did I change it to cookies? Like, I could have made it beef stew. Like, what weird collective unconscious thing did baked goods speak to? That I think the only time working on the show when I got sort of like, ooh, this is spooky, was then. I never thought aliens are coming through my fingers and making me tell this story. But when I switched it to cookies and then read the book, I was like, that's a little weird.
Yeah, no, I bet. What's your process for writing like? When you come up, you can use Taken as an example or any other film. Like, when you come up with an idea, if any writer was watching this, like, how do you go about doing what you do? I mean, you said you have all these, notes.
Well, it's different every time. When I Taken was only my second experience working in television. The first was a Elmore Leonard Western called Desperado that I did for NBC in the late 80s, I guess. And that was very much, it was a movie, and I just went off and wrote. And when I started doing Taken, that was the first I'd seen with the sort of television process, which is index cards and everything's broken down first. And, I wound up, we had a really good room full of writers for a while, but that didn't, in this case, particularly work. And so I wound up writing all of Taken. But in that process, when there were other people, at some point, somebody said, well, the executives are coming in today to see your cards. And I was like, cards? Huh? So my initial process was always, I get an idea and I just start writing. And then I generally write myself into a great big hole that I can't get myself back out of. And, but I sort of mistrusted cards for a long time because it felt like, well, that's hack work. Like real writers just make it up. I love cards. They're really, really useful, you know. So I kind of do a hybrid version where I seem to think better with my fingers than I do just talking. So I just start writing stuff down, and then I'm like, oh, I need to look at it, and then I put up cards, and then I desperately find someone really smart who I can talk to tell me that I'm full of crap. And, you know, just it's so much easier when, you know, when you're not alone. And the thing I like about sort of breaking something into cards is I'm looking at the cards, so I'm looking at this is it makes for extremely achievable goals. Because all of a sudden, instead of, oh, I've got to write, you know, 20 hours of television, how am I going to do that in a month and a half? I'm like, oh, there's these 4 cards. I can do that today. And then suddenly you're done, you know, because you've done a lot of the heavy lifting in advance. Of course, the dirty secret about cards is they're lies. I mean, everything changes as soon as you start writing, you know, and get a good idea. And I still, I like not knowing it all before I start. I like being able to discover, you know, we were talking about it before, just to still be asking questions, and, you know, something bothers you and you want to know why. And so you start poking at it. And I'm a little, this concerns me these days with you know, playing around with the AI writing software and stuff, is that what we do is so formulaic. I'm not particularly creeped out by the fact that a machine is going to take my job, but I don't like the idea that what we do is so formulaic that a machine can figure it out. You know, and like if everything always happens where all the screenwriting books and now, you know, ChatGPT tells me where it's going to happen, then I'm doing something wrong. I mean, it just, there's got to be some place where something surprises you and isn't just the part where things fall apart or the part where they come back together again, or, you know, it's just that in writing for the movies and TV, I mean, I think you have to fight that all the time because it's so easy to fall into this is the part where trap. If that makes any sense.
Yeah. No, it does. And you're so right about, so whether you're writing with a pen or a typewriter or a computer, at least for me, when I have my fingers just typing, you know, the ideas flow a lot more better. They could be completely all over the place, but they just flow more better. But at the same time, I started using index cards in Final Draft. I don't know if you use that software.
I haven't done, I just saw that it was, I was like, I'm so used to seeing them big on a board on the other side of the room.
Which is great. I wish I could do that. But on Final Draft, I mean, my premise was very simple in terms of, like, you know, 6-7 characters. And just to even lay it out, like Act 1, Act 2, Act 3, I'm looking at it, I'm like, oh, okay, now that makes sense. You know, it does give you a little bit of visual assistance.
It's really hard. And when you're trying to figure out what's missing, sometimes just like actually going, oh, this happened and then this happened. And have you ever seen the Matt and Trey how to write thing that's on YouTube? It's Matt, you know, Matt and Trey from South Park. It's their tips for writers. It's the smartest thing on writing I've ever seen.
Check it out.
It's basically, if you could say this happens and then this happens, you're completely screwing up. You have to be able to say this happens, therefore this happens, or but this. It's daunting, and they're right, and you know, and it's funny to watch it because it's really one of the smartest things I've ever seen about screenwriting. And then it's funny to watch it and then watch a South Park episode and realize that they actually do that in South Park. And it's you know,
well, South Park.
The reason South Park is so good. So.
No. So I haven't seen all of South Park, but lately on my social media, like, you know, the clips will come up, and the animation. I mean, now it's like you get used to, but back then when it came out, you know, I remember, like, well, what is this, right? Visually, it doesn't look any appealing, but obviously there was something in the writing that made it work all these years.
They're
and the
brilliant,
characters.
but it's really like this. This is like some of the best writing advice I've ever seen. I think it's like a 2 minute.
I'm gonna check it out. I'm gonna check it out.
It's really-
And Les, when taken, so how involved were you? I mean, I know you were writing the episodes as things went along, but how involved were you as a showrunner, in terms of being on the set, if you were on the set, and having a conversation with the director, or just leaving him alone? Like, what was that like?
Well,
What was that process?
I had to go back and forth because the editing room was in Los Angeles, so
Mhm.
I was more on the set for the first couple.
Where'd you guys film it?
In Vancouver and various other parts of Canada.
Oh, that's near where I am.
Where are you?
Or I'm in Toronto. Well,
Oh yeah, we never got that far east, but you know, mostly Vancouver,
Yeah.
and then like the planes for the last couple of episodes. So I would go back and forth. I was mostly in the editing room. I spent a lot of time with the directors. I mean, obviously, I wrote the whole thing. I was involved in, and a lot of the stuff, like trying to think where like Stephen would come in for all the edits, and obviously he has very good notes in the editing room. He's done a lot of this.
Yeah.
So, that I mean, that obviously that's sort of like, oh, bonus, it's like it's film school. Like it's
Right.
great for both, like, the stuff that was working and the stuff that really wasn't working, and how we would fix it and all of that. It was the most sort of like intense class in that I ever got. But I was pretty much, left alone to do what I could do in the editing room. And it's television, so again, like at some level, I'm the final voice, not the director's cut.
Yeah.
And honestly, I think the most exciting thing to me was I got to pick all the music, and we had a great music supervisor, and Anastasia Brown, and she I don't know how she did it, because we did not have much of a budget, but we've got Bob Dylan and the Grateful Dead and Jackson Brown, and I wrote a song that Emmy Lou Harris recorded. I mean, it was like, so that song that plays through the last couple episodes. So and because we were going from like late 40s to the present, it was like, well, I get to do like, my own personal, like encyclopedia of American music.
Right.
I don't have any copies of this thing, where this was CD days. I made these mixes for the cast and crew that were every single song I could find about flying saucers.
Wow.
So there's, I don't think the Ella Fitzgerald song, I don't think made the show. Two Little Men on a Flying Saucer, but great song. All the way through, the band I was in the 80s, Sparks, did a song called I Married a Martian. So that was in there. So that I think of all sort of the perks of the show. I mean, the obvious perk, I got to work with Steven Spielberg, and then the less obvious perk, I got to pick the music. So that was really, really fun.
I'm sure. And what was that process? Because you're working with different directors, right? Like whether it's in production, kind of on and off, but mostly in post. And just to kind of keep everybody, because creative people are very much different from each other.
Yeah,
if they're similar. So how do you captain that ship to bring everybody into synergy, as the episodes kind of go along?
Well, part of first of all, they were all really good directors, which obviously helps. I mean, when we got to, I guess it's 8 is on the ship, and it was John Fawcett, and he, like there was half the budget there had been, and like he had to figure out how to do that on the spaceship, and so there were like crazy challenges that required really good people. But we had the same DPs and same production designer and art direction and all that. So a lot of that, there was a lot of consistency in that.
Yeah.
Steve Beers was more like the line guy. Producer's a really good producer, and so he was on the set to keep things kind of consistent. I mean, and there were some lofty ideas, like we changed film stock so that they would be more the stock that was used in the time period when we were shooting. And, these are Steven Spielberg perks. Like you get to do that. We got to have a full orchestra to do the score, like there were some like ridiculous perks for a TV show, especially then with a micro budget. But I think also because I wound up writing the whole thing, it was just inevitably, for good or bad, going to be consistent, because it was the same voice. So
no, for sure. And what was the reason? Was it, I mean, you said there was 20 hours allotment, right, at the Sci-Fi Channel, to break it into, I mean, an hour and 22 minutes episode. Now it's a very common thing. You watch Stranger Things. Back then it was like, I don't think it was that common as far as I know.
I think they were, that had sort of been a movie of the week format of much earlier television.
Okay.
But they had this, they broadcast it 5 nights a week for 2 weeks. It was on every night.
Yeah.
Which was really cool. I mean, I don't know, like whoever.
Back then it was unheard of like that.
The one time in my life when I thought, wow, I actually did something that someone noticed was I went to get cat food or something in this mall, and there was a beauty parlor, and it was playing on all the TVs in the beauty parlor. I was like, God, people are actually watching this. I was like, it was amazing. And it did well. And so like by the second week, it was kind of a big deal. For the 2 weeks that it was a deal. But it was a really interesting way to broadcast, because it wasn't like, there wasn't exactly what they used to call the water cooler, because it wasn't like what's going to happen on Game of Thrones this week. It was like what's going to happen tonight. So it was a really exciting 2 weeks.
I bet. And how was your in television, in movie industry, when the movie opens up on a weekend, by Monday you find out if you got sunk or you were taken to the sky. In terms of television,
we knew on
ratings,
we knew we were excited on Tuesday morning after Monday night, and by Wednesday morning we knew it was a hit. It was,
and were the viewership consistent, or did it drop,
Yeah.
or did it increase?
I think it went. They started to, like, I don't remember how they did this, but maybe by Wednesday they were showing the first 2 episodes. So you like by the end of the week you could watch all 5. So if you and so we consistently went up for the 2 weeks.
Yeah. In terms of your personal, I mean, you kind of mentioned one of your favorite scene was Joel's performance of after he killed his wife and comes home to his son. What was probably the most personal moment for you in that series? Not personal in a sense that something that ties close to your life story, but something that was very meaningful to you, that you somehow connected with at a very deep level.
Well, this is so weird. There are a couple. There's weirdly I believe it's the 4th episode is the Vietnam junkie episode. So it's hippie days, and I used all the songs of my youth. So, when I dropped out of college, I was going to be the Grateful Dead. And so when Ripple shows up at the end of that episode, it chokes me up every time I watch it. And it's not like, it's utterly personal. It's just because that song meant a lot to me when I was 20. I couldn't tell you it's the best song I've ever written or anything like that. I just love the song, and there it was, and I got to use it. And, so that got me at a personal level. And when you finally realize that the narration you've been hearing is Dakota writing in her journal, and she's in the recording studio with her mom, that's my voice coming out of the guy in the band. That's a song I wrote. So on a particularly like show-offy level, I was like, yeah, there. My band broke up, but I'm still in a band on television.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. Go on, sorry.
Yeah, and it was a real struggle to figure out how to end it in a way that didn't give pat answers, and that was a little bit, obscure and bittersweet, and I kind of think we nailed the ending, so that I like the ending. Yes,
and I I felt like watching, what I loved about it was this. I honestly, I had completely forgotten that it took place over 4 decades. Like when
Yeah.
I watched it a couple of weeks ago, I just knew the concept, but I had completely forgotten. And when the time started shifting, I'm like, wait a second, is this going all the way to the 90s? And what I found was really cool was the way you were able to connect all the characters and their personal stories, as a writer should, but the way you did it was just so cool. And
Yes.
then the the main thing was never the UFOs. It was more so about, somebody in a bad relationship, or somebody getting
Yeah.
jealous, or somebody feeling this way or that way. And that's what resonates with people at the end of the day, which you delivered beautifully.
Well, thank you. That's great to hear. I
Yeah.
I
And
feel I feel like I want to go watch it.
you should. You should. I will tell you, it's in this day and age, watching an hour and a half episode, 10 episodes in a span of a week was a lot, but at the same time I wanted to watch them, almost like every day, just so that you don't forget about the characters. And sometimes that happens when you watch after a week. I
Yeah.
don't know how we used to watch TV back then.
Well,
Like
I
I
guess
think
I mean because I guess by the way they broadcasted it was almost like binge watching before there was binge watching, because you did like, and that honestly maybe that that helped with the doing so well
you never know.
I mean because everybody could follow it. I mean clearly what part of what helped with it doing so well was it's a Steven Spielberg show about aliens, which is a wonderful thing. It's like I mean like getting to actually be on that.
Yeah, of course.
If you like Close Encounters in ET, you might like Taken. I was like, yeah, I mean, thank you. That's a pretty.
No, it definitely had, for me, it definitely had more connection with Close Encounters than it did with ET, because of the way the abductions were and all that stuff. ET was more about like a friendly alien, and more
Yeah,
about
yeah,
family and broken
sure.
marriage and all that. When you are, what is some of your favorite television writing, in the past or now or back then when you were working on Taken?
Um, in the past, Twilight Zone. It's like
Okay.
it's why I'm a writer. It's just like that like to this day I watch those and I don't know how Rod Serling did that in 22 minutes. Like
Yeah.
they're not. Oh, look, I'm watching an old show and isn't that great? It's like they're perfect. In the more modern world, I mean, in comedy, you already mentioned Seinfeld, like that.
Yeah.
I love that stuff. I think in the golden age, The Sopranos to me is the gold standard. Like I love a lot of other shows. I love Breaking Bad. I like Mad Men a lot. But the Sopranos just like they were like athletes in the zone. They could do nothing wrong. It's the fifth season, and a character who's never had a line of dialogue is gonna move to New Hampshire and fall in love. It was like, what? Like, and it worked, and I still like Tony's near-death experience. Those episodes are some of my favorite things ever in television. I'm trying to think there's lots of stuff I love. Right now, I'm really digging
That's
the Perry.
okay.
I'm really
Yeah.
digging the Perry. I'm digging the Perry Mason show right now. I think it's
But the
really
great thing about Sopranos was, I think that, well, I don't know the history of HBO, but that put HBO on the map,
absolute.
and it also changed the tone of television. Especially one of the things that when you're, whether you're writing I don't know, a short film, a TV serial, or a feature film, most of the movies, if you look through history or even television, the reason if the people remember them is because the characters have vulnerabilities, ridiculous vulnerabilities. And when you show a character being, okay, and knows how, like a superhero, for example, right? Personally, for me, I'm not a superhero fan.
Neither am I.
I've never grown up.
Why neither of us will ever work again.
and I don't know. I think I've only seen, the only trilogy I've seen is the Tim Burton one, this part 1 and 2 back in the 90s.
Oh, sure.
And then the Batman trilogy by Christopher Nolan. And I don't classify them as superhero movies, especially the Christopher Nolan one, because it's about a broken guy trying to find his place. And going back to what I was saying was, the idea of having in writing like an antagonist along with a protagonist, that to me attracts in that subconscious or conscious level way more. Like when you have a strong antagonist, it makes you feel for the protagonist way more as opposed to just being the protagonist alone. Would you agree with that?
Oh yeah, absolutely. There's also, like one of those truisms is like nobody thinks they're the bad guy, but
Yeah,
that's that's seriously true. Yeah, and I think what's interesting is when and David Chase is like, because one of my other favorite shows of all time is the Rockford Files, and David Chase wrote on the Rockford Files, and there are countless Rockford Files references all over The Sopranos, and he slipped one by the goalie. They weren't looking, and nobody realized it was going to blow up and be this huge thing. And you can watch, like, the times when the movies or television get really good are when, like, again, back to when somebody doesn't think they know the formula. I mean, what HBO did immediately after The Sopranos was made two very, very good shows that were still trying to be The Sopranos. How about a dysfunctional Mormon family? How about a dysfunctional funeral home family? And so as good as both of those shows are, and they're both really, really good shows, but they still, I remember when they came out, still feeling like they're trying to do that TV thing. We've had a talking horse. How about a flying nun? It's just like,
yeah, a lot of TV networks do it still now, right? Because it's all about the money at the end of the day. I mean, even with Games of Thrones, they're coming up with like 3 or 4 series. At least the last time I read, I don't know if I think one of them aired and it got tanked, or they finished one episode and they canceled it before it even got aired.
I don't know.
Yeah, but on Taken, what was while being on the set, if you can remember any story, and I'm not looking for any controversy, let's just something as a creative person, as a filmmaker, or the audience who is listening to this and watching this, something that came, and there's a lot of things that happen on the set every single day that you got to find a solution to, right? Any story that you remember that took place in that?
Well, the biggest one really was that all that stuff falling out for Joel killing his wife. That was really the biggest, like, set crisis that we have to solve, and the solution makes things better.
And how long did it take for the solution to come into play? Like, very quickly, or?
Just, what do we do? We got a car and a guy and a gun. What do we do? We don't have a road, and we don't have a stunt, and we don't, like, all we have is this stretch of highway, and what do we do? And as I said, Sergio was a great director, and it was just like it was just us going back and forth, going like, how can we make this as nasty and scary as possible? And that was it. Not really like other than that, I don't have got, like, my set stories were mostly, wow, this looks just like I pictured it, or or this looks better than I pictured it, or like that they were not there. There was nothing really dramatic in terms. I mean, I don't even have any good gossipy stories that I wouldn't tell.
No, I'm not looking for gossip.
No, I know, but I mean, I wish I had a good one, but
yeah, I'm always intrigued that being on a set of any kind of production, things go wrong, like, and it's up to the director to figure out, instead of putting his head down, because he's captaining or she's captaining the ship, to figure out, or even the showrunner in your case, to figure out a solution. And I, it's funny, if you've ever seen that show on Netflix called Movies That Made Us.
Yeah.
How they talk about Die Hard and Aliens, and the amount of crap they went through, and we watch it in such quick excitement and entertainment in the 2.5 hours. But the amount of crap they went through to get it made, it just goes to show that was totally worth it.
A lot, yeah. I think a lot of our crap happened before we started, and I think then we were all just so frantic to we were like, everybody was working against like crazy guns, so it was really. We didn't have enough time to really screw it up, because we just, I was one of the great things about television is especially then, it just moved so fast that, you might not get it perfect, but you didn't have time to get it wrong, so that was kind of helpful.
How many shoot days were there? I mean, I would imagine several months.
They were very short. I honestly don't remember. They were super short shoots, like
But were
so.
you guys going like were you guys shooting each episode, finishing it, and then moving on to, or were there parts if you're already at one location, why not just save money and do that? Or was that
We were. I mean, there's probably some cribbing in the editing room. Like a reaction shot that might have come from a different episode or something. I mean, there's
Mm,
that you can't do that without strict rules from the Directors Guild. Obviously, like you can't steal somebody else's work without paying for it. But we didn't do a lot of like we could pick that up for the next episode stuff. There were some, like I think there's a couple where the location stayed the same for a couple of episodes, stuff like that.
but would each episode take a month to produce, production
I
wise?
think less than that. I think like 3 weeks.
Really? Yeah.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
pretty quick.
Honestly, it's a crazy blur to me. I was going back and forth a lot. I was writing like crazy. I was in an editing room. I had a 4-year-old son, so I couldn't tell you.
What is one of the most fondest memory, if I'm asking you this question right now, the thing that comes to your mind? It could be something really small or something big, or maybe
Did Emmy Lou Harris recording my song, like
okay.
far and away. I mean, our music supervisor knew her, and it was kind of like it was going to cost more than the music budget for that episode. And I remember talking to the DreamWorks executives, my friend Daryl Frank, and I was like, it's going to cost a little bit more, but I can get Emmy Lou. He was like, you can get Emmy Lou Harris, like whatever you want to spend. And
Oh, wow.
it was not that expensive, but I remember getting I didn't get to go to Nashville to watch her record, but I got the tape of her doing it. And I drove over to the drummer from my old bands. I drove over to his house. I hadn't seen him in maybe 6 months.
Yeah.
And I just I went in and I was like, just put this on. And he knew the song. And so we put it on and we both just sat there and started crying. It was just, we were like, I can't believe that happened. So that would be it's weird that, we won an Emmy Award. I should tell you, that was my fondest. But honestly, that I could not believe that voice was singing my song. So that was kind of it for me.
I'm sure. Were you a big fan of that Cameron Crowe movie, Almost Famous?
I like the movie a lot.
Yeah. I'm just asking in terms of the connection of the music and all that.
Yeah. I knew him a little bit back then in his rock and roll days. And
so back before he became a filmmaker.
Yeah. And it was like he got that world like nailed, and it's rare to see anybody get that's a very hard thing to write about. Like people get music wrong a lot when they try to get it on screen, I think.
How so?
He gets a little tropey, the evil manager, or that just or the clothes look wrong, or the music's not right. This is very, very hard to do. There's a great movie about country music called Payday from the 70s that nailed the music scene perfectly. Spinal Tap, of course, but it's hard.
Yeah, I'm just taking a note of this. You also worked on, we talked about Dante's Peak, but you also did another film that I really enjoyed back in the 90s, Daylight.
Oh, thank you.
It's a pretty simple concept, but were you involved in it just as a writer, or were you also as a producer on that?
I was having lunch with a producer named Joe Singer, and I was an ebb in my career, I like all the things I bought with my Nightmare on Elm Street money were breaking and my rent was due. And he said something to me like, well, everybody knows you're a good writer, but you don't think commercially. And Towering Inferno had just been on TV. And so I was just being kind of bitchy. And I was like, well, I like commercial movies. I like disaster movies. Like, what if I trap 50 people in the Holland Tunnel on a really hot day? And then we both were like quiet for, like a minute. We're like, oh, that's a really good idea. That's kind of like one of those ideas, that you're supposed to be able to say in one sentence. So I said, get me to New York, get me in a tunnel, and I'll write a script in 6 weeks. And so he did those things. It was, again, pre 9/11. So they closed the Brooklyn Battery tunnel so I could go look at it.
Wow.
And then I had this long, hard talk with myself, which basically I was like, you can't keep saying these people are so stupid, because if they're so stupid, why don't you have more of their money? Like just play by the rules. So I read all the big action scripts that had sold in the last 6 months. And then I wrote the script that was just all messed up and full of all the weird stuff that I always do. But it did have people trapped in the Holland Tunnel. It was just, they were, I'd like to think, more interesting people than usually get trapped in the Holland Tunnel. And then we sold the script, and then they made a movie that had very little to do with my script, which is how that worked in those days. I think
you got to get Stallone in it, so that was pretty big.
Yeah. I think there's one line of my dialogue left in the movie, which is, the tunnel extends for 300 feet under the road, whatever everything in the 10 minutes where the tunnel blows up is the way I wrote it to blow up. Well, something I like occasionally if I'm, talking to young writers about, what you do when you write a screenplay, and basically they think you write what comes out of the people's mouths usually first. And I was like,
yeah.
See this movie? This is the part I wrote. The part that doesn't have any dialogue where shit blows up. That's the part I wrote. I haven't seen that. I watched a little bit of it recently because it was on TV. I haven't seen it since it came out, but it looked like it was pretty good, actually.
I
had nothing to do with it, so I'm saying, look, I mean, look kind of cool.
One of the things you mentioned is interesting, and I think as creative people, it's not a good thing to say, but I think it's important for all of us to go through it. You said that when you were barely breaking even, and you don't think commercially, and you were forced, because of your situation, you were forced to become uncomfortable, and that's when things started getting better.
True. Yeah.
And I feel that is so important. I mean, you look at everybody's career, not just in film. You look at Elon Musk, you look at Steve Jobs, and all the people. You have to go through. Pardon me?
Nothing.
What my point is that you have to go through all that suffering and that pain in order to realize that if you're really able to withstand that and come out of it on the other side. And would you give that advice to young people who are trying to break in any industry for that matter?
To be uncomfortable, or I mean,
yeah, to put yourself in a situation where you're uncomfortable.
Yeah, I mean, it's also great if you can put yourself in a situation where you have no other option, because
that's true too.
Which, like that easy for me to say, because it's like,
well, now it is, but back then it wasn't.
Yeah, right? But I mean, I wasn't going to be unhoused if I didn't sell the script. I was just going to have to figure out how to be a 40-year-old ex-bass player, which would have worked out on some level. I mean, so I mean, I feel a little privileged to be giving that advice, but
no, there's nothing privileged.
But on some level, you got to be, it's. I mean, you have to. It's there. There are. I was going to say, they're probably easier ways to make a living, but I'm a grown man and people pay me to make stuff up, so like that's not working for a living. As far as that's really, I'm very lucky. So, and I like. Yeah. So I'm never quite sure what I would say in that advice. I mean, like half of me is on the don't give up your day job train, and the other half is on the follow your dreams trains.
Yeah, it's a tough thing, right? Like either you have job security or you have happiness.
Also because
that's great, that's awesome, but
also because like a lot of what I do is on the commercial end of the artistic spectrum, so that end tends to pay better than being a poet, so the advice is a little bit different, because if you're gonna be on that end of the spectrum. You're going to be working for people who deservedly want to get something for the stupid amounts of money they're spending. So there are certain rules you need to play by, and that's fair.
Fair enough. What's unless you have anything you can't reveal, just the last couple of questions. What's the next few projects that you're working on that are official, or you're
I'm
not
writing
on?
I'm writing a spaghetti western for Fox TV for a series. That's what all the cards on the board are like.
And
for.
when is that supposed to come out?
No idea. We're just at the beginnings.
So it may not be for another year or two, but more than likely.
Yeah. It's hard to say, but it's some of the most fun. My dad did a western in the 50s called Rawhide, and so it's really like me getting to type the words interior saloon. It just makes me smile every time I'm in a saloon. I'm like, I cannot believe I'm writing cowboy stuff. So it's really, really fun.
On that note, you mentioned about your dad, and is there ever a plan to write something about your parents?
It's fun. When I wrote $20, which was a script of my dad's, which I rewrote, and it's not, there's none of his script in it, but when I watch the movie now, it's all about parents and children. Every relationship in the movie is some sort of parent-child relationship. And I didn't do that on purpose. It's not like what I was saying about Taken, where everything was going to be about people being taken by something, but it winds up being thematically like completely, at least how I felt when I was 40 about, not just fathers and sons, there's, mother-daughter stuff there. It's like any combination of I'm doing this to make the combination. I've written, like essays, fiction about my family more, but not in any. That's funny you ask, because I had a really lofty series I could never sell that was basically my parents' love story, because they crossed paths a lot before they ever met. So, so it was sort of and my dad came through Ellis Island, and my mom's parents were immigrants. So it had a lot of that to it. And I think about going back to that once in a while. It's daunting. I mean, it's like historical fiction on any level is just, that's heavy lifting. Not to mention dealing with your family demons, which might also be heavy lifting.
Well, I mean, Spielberg took 60 years to make The Fabelmans.
Yeah, exactly.
But on that note, Les, thank you so much for your
time.
Thanks
for having me. And
if there's anything else you want to add,
I think you asked a lot of great questions, so hopefully I gave some okay answers.
No, you were great. It was great to revisit Taken, and thank you for making Taken and writing Taken, because I watched it again, like I said, a week or so ago, and watching something 20 years old to see if it still holds up. I will say it holds up. So congratulations.
I'm relieved to hear that. Well, it's great meeting you.
Likewise.
All right.
I would love to talk to you more, probably about Dante's Peak and Daylight in detail. Maybe we'll do another one.
Sure, anytime.
Great. Thank you so much.
Okay.
Bye.